Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into something absolutely fascinating and honestly pretty high stakes. We're unpacking a recent deep dive presented by the Renewed Wisdom Network. Now, whether you're a theology buff or you're just kind of curious about how different religions view the afterlife and human accountability, this source offers a really meticulously structured look at what it claims is essentially the ultimate final exam for humanity. So, the central dramatic question the source material poses is simple, but it is incredibly heavy. What actually happens on Judgment Day? According to this framework, every single human being will inevitably face a guaranteed moment of absolute accountability. And we're not talking about a metaphor here. The source presents this as a literal, scheduled appointment for us all.
All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the certainty of judgment. Then we'll walk through the three big questions: true belief, faithful stewardship, and radical compassion. And finally, we'll wrap up with what they call the final invitation.
Okay, let's jump straight into part one, the certainty of judgment, setting the stage for the final verdict. The source roots its entire argument firmly in biblical text, specifically citing Romans chapter 14, which says, "We will all stand before the judgment seat of God. So then, each of us will give an account of ourselves to God." The speaker uses this verse to establish a really clear baseline. Absolutely no one is exempt. It doesn't matter if you're a powerful politician, a famous pastor, or a stay-at-home parent. The framework presents this as a universal, unavoidable event for the great and the small alike. But here's where it gets intense. The framework goes a step further. The speaker emphasizes that God isn't just up there tallying a surface-level checklist of your good and bad behavior. The core argument is that your hidden motives are what's truly examined. The speaker claims that on this day, the masks come off. Every secret thought, word, and action is revealed, meaning the real you stands before the real God, with absolutely zero room to hide behind outward appearances. Moving right along to question one, true belief, or as the source frames it, religion versus relationship. According to the video, the very first specific question Jesus will ask is, "What did you do with my son?" The speaker is super insistent that this question is absolutely not about your church membership or your religious performance or how great your reputation is among other believers. Instead, it's positioned as this unavoidable, deeply personal inquiry into your actual relationship with Jesus Christ. You know, people usually lean on common answers when thinking about this stuff, right? Things like, well, I tried to be a good person, or I gave to charity, or I actively volunteered at my church. But the framework argues that Jesus will reject all of those answers. It states that salvation isn't a reward for human effort, but a gift of grace. So the only correct response, according to the source, is having fully received Jesus as a personal savior and trusting in his sacrifice, completely throwing out any trust in your own good works. The speaker brilliantly illustrates this point using a pretty shocking passage from Matthew chapter 7. It describes people literally pointing to their miracles and all their great public works, only to be told, "I never knew you." The source uses this to argue that having outward Christian activity, or just knowing about Jesus intellectually, it's completely meaningless without true surrendered intimacy. Basically, having the appearance of religion just does not equal having a relationship. All right, that brings us to question two. Faithful stewardship. This one is all about purpose, priorities, and action. So the second question the framework poses is, what did you do with what I gave you? The whole premise here is that your life was actually never yours to begin with. Everything you possess, your time, your natural abilities, your money, your influence, even your daily energy, it's all viewed as a borrowed gift from God. And because it's borrowed, it requires really active, intentional stewardship. To break this down, the source uses the biblical parable of the talents. So a master gives different amounts of resources to three servants based on their abilities. The two servants who were given 5 talents and 2 talents, they invested and multiplied what they were given, and they were rewarded. But look at the servant who just got 1 talent. He buried his gift out of fear, or maybe laziness. He didn't waste it on a life of sin, he simply did nothing with it. And according to the source, doing nothing is enough to be totally rebuked and lose everything. The framework asserts that God expects a return on his investment. But it's not just about what you do. The why matters just as much. The source differentiates heavily between building your own platform, chasing recognition, or building up a personal brand, versus faithfully building his kingdom. The speaker notes that God sees the true heart behind the action. Even the smallest efforts, when they're done in secret and with genuine faithfulness, matter infinitely more than these grand, flashy gestures that are just done for selfish ambition or public applause. Let's bring this down to everyday life.
The source gives three really distinct examples to make its point. It points to a hypothetical famous musician who took this incredible, God-given gift and just buried it in worldly ambition, ultimately pointing no one to Christ. Contrast that with a quiet coworker who simply prayed with others and showed kindness in completely ordinary, unnoticed moments. Or a devoted mother investing daily in discipling her kids. In this framework's theological economy, God deeply values the faithful, quiet mother and the kind coworker way over the famous but self-serving musician. Faithfulness always, always beats flashiness.
Let's move into question 3, radical compassion and what practical love in action really looks like. The third and final question is definitely a gut punch. How did you treat my little ones? This completely shifts the focus away from your internal beliefs or how you stewarded your talents and directly asks how much of God's love actually visibly lived within you and manifested in your day-to-day treatment of others. The framework leans heavily on a verse from Matthew chapter 25. Truly I say to you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. This is a staggering concept presented by the speaker. The idea is that Jesus identifies so personally and so intimately with the vulnerable that ignoring them is quite literally equivalent to ignoring him. To love them is to love him.
So, who exactly are these little ones? Well, the source categorizes them really clearly. They are orphans needing a home and protection, widows carrying heavy burdens all by themselves, immigrants who are strangers in a foreign land and often mistreated, prisoners, and that can mean bound by literal bars or even unseen chains like severe addiction and shame, and the sick, whether that's physically, emotionally, or mentally. The framework argues that these are the exact people who require our immediate, practical love, not just our thoughts and prayers, but real action.
And make no mistake, the source is incredibly clear on what loving them actually looks like. True love is costly. It takes time. It causes major inconvenience, and it is done in secret when the cameras are completely off. The speaker asserts that true compassion is not some soft sentiment, and it's certainly not a performative social media post. It often means opening your wallet, opening your door, or opening your arms when it is incredibly inconvenient to love people who have absolutely no way to ever repay you.
Which leads us to the final part of our explainer, the final invitation, a call for immediate reflection.
At this point, the speaker shifts gears and actually invites viewers to reflect right then and there, guiding them through the mechanics of what's often called a sinner's prayer. It outlines 3 specific steps. First, acknowledging your own sin and your deep need for grace. Second, placing your trust entirely in Jesus' sacrifice on the cross rather than relying on your own good deeds to earn your way. And third, fully surrendering your heart and life to him. This prayer is presented by the network as the ultimate resolution, the only way to ensure you're actually ready to answer those 3 daunting questions on Judgment Day. And that leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative challenge from the source. It's a question that honestly lingers no matter what your personal theological background is. How will your life answer? We've explored the Renewed Wisdom Network's entire framework today: true belief, faithful stewardship, and radical compassion. So whether you view this as literal, undeniable theology or just as a really profound philosophical lens on how we conduct our lives, it absolutely demands that we examine our hidden motives, our daily priorities, and exactly how we treat the vulnerable around us. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.